Hi there, esteemed audience, and Happy New Year! Welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja, the first episode for 2020. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and the you thinking that I'm not going to tell you what the third book is because I never do. Nope, it's a brand new year, esteemed audience. I'll tell you. It's Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy is the title of the third book. If you check out the website, middlegradeninja.com, you can see the spiffy new cover that's been revealed and learn more about the third of Banneker Bones and Ellicott Skullworth's adventures fighting robots. Banneker Bones is an 11-year-old biracial boy detective. He's basically Batman at age 11, and he is always fighting a new monster to save Latimer City. It's a good time. If you're interested, there's never been a better time to get started on the series with the third book coming soon and very soon. You can get the first book, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, as a paperback and audiobook, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I have written some novels for older readers, such as the young adult novel All Together Now, a Zombie Story, which is essentially Walking Dead fan fiction. If you like slow zombies, if you always wanted to see what would happen if they attacked an Indiana town, I guarantee you it would involve a church and a Walmart, and that's the story I've got for you. All Together Now, a Zombie Story. If you like that, check out the companion piece, All Right Now, a Short Zombie Story. If you want to blow past the young adult and get straight to the hard adult horror, I've also got a 5-volume anthology, The Book of David. The Book of David is about an atheist that purchases a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. It is bonkers. If you're interested in just an absolutely bonkers read, or you just want to wade your toe in, you could check out the Book of David Chapter 1 as an ebook. You can download that one for free. You can also get the paperback, or you can get all 5 chapters as a single compilation in the Book of David, and check those out. So that's the Book of David by Robert Kent. As always, keep up with what's going on with the show on the website, middlegradeninja.com. Check out a listing of all the guests we've got planned for you here in 2020. It's going to be another great year of the podcast. I'm excited. I hope you are as well. And today I couldn't be more excited. We've got the incredible good fortune to talk to, I think, our first ever author from Canada, Miss Erin Bow. Erin Bow, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Thank you so much for making the time to appear. And you are in your, for those watching on YouTube rather than listening, you are in your writer's shed this morning. Is that right?
I am, yeah. I call it the deep shed because, you know, sometimes I do deep work and sometimes I'm just in deep shed. So, yeah, it's a little 9x7 shed in my backyard because I got a couple of kids and a couple of elderly parents and a big old fluffy dog in there, so it's kind of crazy in my house to write, and the shed is nice and quiet.
And I had read we're gonna talk about all kinds of fascinating stuff. You know, we should tease the shed. I've got more questions for you about your writing shed. But okay. We should start by, for an esteemed audience who hasn't been stalking you online, reading your book, getting to know you as much as one can without talking to you first, please give them kind of an overview of your background and how you got started writing.
I'm one of those people that came late to writing. I was always a kid who had her nose in a book. I was always the go outside and play. I can see your flashlight under the covers kid. But it never occurred to me that like books were something that humans created. I guess I thought they just kind of came into the world somehow, like mayflies. So it never occurred to me that I could be a person who wrote books. So instead, I was a person who really liked science because I also imprinted on Carl Sagan like a duck. I give my age away, but yeah, the original Cosmos, I was just kind of like, that is so cool. So I studied physics. I worked for a while, just a year at CERN, the particle collider outside of Geneva. I went to graduate school and then I dropped out. So calling me a physicist is like calling a kid that dropped out of med school a doctor. It's my background and there's no other good shorthand, but you know, compared to the people who actually do research, I don't have a lot of training. Then I spent my 20s doing stupid things like answering telephones and writing manuals for flipping hamburgers before I finally got serious about writing. I wrote my first book was a book of poetry, published it I was about 30, and it won a big award, and that kind of put me on the path. So now I have 2 books of poetry, a memoir, which absolutely nobody read, and 5 novels. 2 books of fantasy for young readers, for young adults. There's Plain Kate is a Russian-flavored fairy tale about a girl who sells her shadow and gets a talking cat, which is exactly what you need to escape the witch-burning mobs in Russia. Yeah, he gets her into more trouble than anything else, but, I firmly believe that all cats can talk, they just don't find us worthy. So this is that book.
Did you discover that at CERN?
No, I didn't.
Should we be concerned?
There were some very sad radioactive cats at CERN because the building I worked with, it's not underground like the ones are now. It was in the open air, like a big airplane hangar of a kind of place, and the animals would wander in and out.
So they had a radioactive paws kind of crossed, and like, we can talk to you, but we're not going to, because you made us radioactive.
I remember making friends with a particular cat in there, and my supervisor going, "Oh, look, this one's still roughly symmetrical." Okay. I've been trying to make it up to cats ever since. Yeah. Sorrow's Knot's my second book. It's another fantasy. It's about a girl who inherits from her mother the power to repel the restless dead, which otherwise spread this kind of contagious, terrible madness. And she's very proud of her power. She's very secure in her place in her society and her traditions until mom dies. So it's a family book and a book about madness, and it's really creepy. This is the book that I wrote to the actual literal cabin in the woods to write, and that was a bad idea. That really super spooked me. And then there's
happened to that cabin. We don't put a pin in that. We'll tease that as well. I want to know more about that cabin experience.
Okay. Scorpion Rules and the Swan Riders are a pair of young adult science fiction, political, post-apocalyptic, transhuman thrillers. The first one's set entirely on a goat farm in Saskatchewan, as they tend to be. And the second one has, mad artificial intelligences riding horses. So they're bonkers, but they're a lot of fun. They're big, serious, chewy, deep books, but they're also bonkers, and they have a lot of goats and humor in them. At this point, goats are kind of my brand. And then the newest one is the middle grade adventure Stand on the Sky, which young readers never get it, but old librarians will get it perfectly. Did you read Where the Red Fern Grows?
Of course.
Of course, right? The book about the boy, and he has the 2 dogs, and he raises them in this beautiful friendship, and then the cougar attacks the dogs, and they die. So the red fern grows up out of their grave. Spoiler. There's one really good reason to write books. It's out of spite. I wrote The Red Fern Grows with a happy ending. So Stand on the Sky is Where the Red Fern Grows, but in Mongolia, with a girl and an eagle and a happy ending.
So why, we talk about almost anything. Let's spend a little time on Stand on the Sky, the brand new book that is available right now, esteemed audience. It's in bookstores. It's online. My God, where can't you get a copy? What was it? So I wanted to ask you about, because I'd read your quote about wanting to give Where the Red Fern Grows a happy ending. And so did you actually draw inspiration from that? Are there parallels between the 2 stories? I was looking for them. I didn't see them.
I didn't go back and read it. I still haven't forgiven Wilson Rawls, actually. So I didn't go back and read it. It was just, I cut my teeth as a young reader of a certain age on books like Where the Red Fern Grows and on Sounder. Anybody read Sounder? And Shiloh and The Fledgling, which is about a goose, but also the goose dies. All of these books, Old Yeller. I read Old Yeller when I was a certain age. All of these books about a kid and an animal where the relationship with the animal like transforms their place in their family and their identity, as a metaphor for growing up, usually in these middle grade books. And then as a metaphor for finishing growing up, the animal dies. Almost always. And since I was always really more attached to the animals than to the human characters, I just couldn't stand it anymore. So I wanted one where it's the same metaphor, but it doesn't have the same ending. So the parallels are not exact. It's just kind of flavored.
Gotcha. So that's fun. Because when I read your quote, I thought, oh, well, how sweet. She must have really been inspired by this book she loved. And now I'm hearing, oh, pure spite.
I love the book, but absolutely pure spite. I'm about to go talk to high school students this afternoon, and I'm going to tell them, one of the best reasons to write a book is pure spite. You find the book that you hate, and you write the book that fixes it. Well, I don't know if you can hate it, but, you find the book that's broken or that breaks you in some way, and you write the book that fixes it. Or you find the book that they wouldn't give to you, that didn't exist, and you write the book that you need, so I think there are a lot of people doing that these days, which is fabulous to see.
When you write, do you have an ideal writer or an ideal reader in mind, or are you just writing for a younger version of you, or is it a little bit of both?
Usually it's a younger version of me. Usually I write the books. Well, I always write a book that I would want to read. I write the stuff that I like to read. I read a lot of middle grade. I read a lot of young adult. I read the occasional, just straight up adult book. I've lost track of science fiction, so I have trouble threading my way through the adult science fiction community these days. I still read, I'm Canadian, so read CanLit kind of stuff. But every once in a while you read this CanLit thing, and it's like, we moved north to find ourselves, and then we all died in the snow. And they don't tell stories. They're just extended set pieces and meditations, and they're beautiful, but I like stories. So I read young people's stuff because young people's stuff always has a story in it.
Most of the time. I can think of some glaring examples, but I do my absolute best to never author shame on the show, unless the target's so big that they won't care. So once in a while, I'll score a shot on J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. I don't think they're listening. But other authors, even if I have spite toward their book, even if it has fueled me to write another story, I feel like, well, the worst thing that author did, unless they really did something bad, the worst thing they did was to try to entertain me and to increase our shared literary conversation, and that's okay. I wish you'd done it better, but I can't knock the goal.
That's a reasonable point. But I will point out that Wilson Rawls, who wrote Where the Red Fern Grows, is dead now. So,
but his grandchildren are listening and they're crying their eyes out.
You know what? I would still give that book to young people. There are some books from my childhood that haven't aged gracefully. That, turn out to be wildly racist in retrospect or something, that I wouldn't give to a very young reader without, an opportunity to make it a conversation. But that's not one of them. It's really a lovely book. It's just a sad book. It's a book that'll make you cry and cry and cry. But I've written a couple of those myself, so.
Well, it's something I go back and forth on, and I haven't made my peace with it either way. Is some of these great authors that I looked up to. Roald Dahl is one of the examples I usually use because he's one of my absolute favorites. And I love The Witches. It is my favorite middle grade book, and it is undeniably sexist. As I go back and I read it as an adult, you can't miss it. It's right there. And as I think about all the time, as I must have read that book 25 times growing up, because just every summer I'd put it back in rotation at least once because it was the only middle grade book I knew of that was really scary. There were other middle grade books my mom would let me read, there was Bunnicula, and I love Bunnicula, but Bunnicula is not scary. The Witches is scary.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it's undeniably sexist. I think, well, one is that maybe some responsible for some issues with women I had early on, and two, at least partly, probably also growing up in the '80s didn't help, and then two, but can I pass that on to my son? How much weight should we give that? Because if you take the sexism out, and it's real hard to separate in a story about killer women attacking a small boy. But if you take that sexism out, is that still a brilliant work that should be revered, that we should learn from? And how do you handle that? Is it just having a conversation with a young reader that, hey, this is in here, let's talk about it enough? Or should we say, nope, let's start with new books? Because I worry that as authors, just by definition, progress is going to move beyond us, I hope. And so at one point, there will be things in our books that are not as progressive as wherever we hopefully end up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, hopefully the entire 20th century will age badly, right? I mean, hopefully we're going to move beyond some of the stuff that's like deeply programmed into us. And I don't know. I don't know how to deal with, I mean, there are some books that are given to really young readers with no context that I think probably shouldn't be. Like, I read Little House on the Prairie maybe 50 times when I was little, because I'm from there. I'm from Nebraska, South Dakota. You know, I went out personally to see the farmstead where Pa planted the cottonwood trees. I mean, this was a holy pilgrimage for me. But I probably wouldn't give those books. I didn't give those books to my girls when they were the same age that I was when I loved them. I might give them to them now. They're 11 and 14 now, so they're a little bit almost too big to read them. But if they read them now, I'd, read them alongside like The Birch Bark House. And let's talk about American westward expansion and who was there before the actual westward expansion started. And there's a lot to unpack in those books it's buried so deep that I think it just gets right in at little readers. I don't know. On the other hand, authors are human, right? And none of us are perfect. And, none of our books are going to be perfect. And I think extending a certain amount of forgiveness to each other is probably important. I don't know that everybody is obligated to forgive everything, and especially with authors who, aren't self-reflective and don't ask for forgiveness. But, I was just talking the other day in Plain Kate, my very first novel, there's a character who's albino and a witch. And I wouldn't do that again. I didn't realize, I was writing out of Russian fairy tales in which that is a real trope. I'd read this 500-page book of Russian fairy tales and I just put it back on the page. I didn't realize that that's still a stereotype that still hurts people with albinism. I mean, there are parts of the world where that will still get you killed.
Because you might be a witch because you were born albino.
Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't do it again. But I think it's still a good book. And, I hope that, if there's an albino reader, maybe this is not the book for them. Maybe this is something they don't need to forgive. But I hope that some of my other readers will extend some forgiveness to me. I did write an albino character into the Scorpion Rules just for the chance to do it better. And he is, just kind of a rock star with cool prosthetic eyes and Lithuanian accent that's sort of adorable. He's the engineer who blows things up of the group. So
is that your writerly penance?
My little writerly chance to do it better. To write a really awesome character with albinism instead of actually the witch character is awesome too, but still, I wouldn't do it again. I don't know.
Makes sense. I try to keep a nice, healthy dose of forgiveness, especially for authors of the past, because one, I want that applied to me, just absolutely. But two, it's also I think we're both old enough now to remember a time when the internet wasn't a thing. When I want to shock young people at school visits or when I meet them, I tell them when I grew up there was no internet. They're like, oh my God, were there dinosaurs? And it's hard to remember a time when everybody didn't have such widely available access to information. which is just crucial, trying to go back and understanding that younger mindset. Like, for example, one of another favorite author of mine is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and I like to joke that because I'm a flying saucer enthusiast, that should that ever be proven to absolutely have been a hoax, completely made up, I don't think that's likely, but if it were to be so, I would want people to look at me the same way and separate that out a little bit, the way I look back at poor Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his pictures of fairies. That, like, dude, 10 seconds on Google, we can prove that that's not a thing. But there was no Google. He just had the photograph, and all the photographs he'd ever look at were not that great. And you could see a brilliant mind kind of going down that rabbit hole, and I think that's forgivable.
It is. It is. I think, you know, times change and cultures change, but we do stay human. So I think we can connect to these people who, you know, have written something that just today it just wouldn't fly. Like if you wrote that today, you would just be. I'm not thinking of Doyle specifically because I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. But there's plenty of stuff from the 19th century where if it was written today, it would just have to be written by a clueless human being. But it wasn't. You know, it was written by, you know, someone with deep compassion and caring and talent and insight into their society. And I don't know, I don't think we have to throw all those things out necessarily. You know, I think maybe just some awareness of how things change and how our culture informs what we do is probably a smart thing to have. It's tricky. It's tricky though. And you know, I talk as a white woman, right? I'm really not generically the person who's affected by this. It's easy for me to forgive because in most cases I'm not the one that's getting hurt. So, you know, brown people may well have different perspectives, and I think probably, you know, it's worth listening to those before you listen to me, but since I'm here, there you go, that's mine.
No, I'm a heterosexual white male that grew up in a small Indiana town of mostly heterosexual white people, or at least officially heterosexual. That's how I should phrase that. Then I fell in love with an African American woman in college, and we married, and we have a beautiful child together. And it was it wasn't quite like taking the red pill in the Matrix, but it was unbelievably eye-opening, looking at all these things I'd never had to look at in a particular way before. And it almost, I would joke that it was like discovering that you've been living in a conspiracy theory, but the conspiracy is so unbelievably obvious that that's why it was impossible to see, because it's just so in your face, the institutional racism that surrounds us and creates, makes all things possible. And it got me thinking, like, oh, maybe my all-white Indiana town didn't happen by accident. Oh, that changes things.
Yeah. Well, racism is a thing. I think it's easy for white people to miss racism because it's a structure that we're standing on top of, right? You know, you don't have to see the ground. So.
Well, it's another one of those things that I think is a very human thing. I remember when Katrina happened. I was with my father-in-law, and we were watching. He was my girlfriend's dad at the time. He's my father-in-law now. We were watching the victims from the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and then we saw some people commenting on it, and you know, they were white, wealthier people, and they said, well, if I were in that situation, we'd have just piled the family into our SUV, and we got four-wheel drive, we'd have just driven right out of there. Just a complete lack of empathy and understanding. Which is why sometimes when I get all fired up about billionaires, so it's a passion of mine, is how much I hate billionaires, because I don't think they're admirable people. And I think if there's one thing that I can impart to people, it's stop thinking billionaires are good. If they think they're good, they're delusional. You can't listen to them. Objectively, they're not. But then I think about how I don't spend my moments. I don't give every penny I have to charity. And I have some pennies I could be given. And I try and judge, I don't know what I'm trying to get at, other than I just try and cut humans some slack, just because it's difficult to be a human and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. I think that's a good takeaway. That's a really good takeaway. So,
Well, that got extra philosophical extra early. I
had really early. We're talking about the racial biases of the canon. Let's talk about something different.
Meaning of life. That's the next
that, Rob. There's no way for us to fix that in the next hour. The canon has racial biases. Stipulated. Okay.
Well, let's start. I teased the shed and the cabin. We're getting to both those things. Don't worry, esteemed audience. Okay. I haven't forgotten. But I wanted to ask you. You mentioned the Canada lit, the trope of coming and making a journey north and discovering yourself. Couldn't you write that? I mean, you grew up in Omaha, right? And now you're in Canada. I think you moved early on. I'd written down your age, but early 20s maybe?
Yeah, somewhere in there. I basically right after grad school. So I've lived here every time I wasn't in university, so most of my adult life. So yeah, I guess so. I guess I could write the move north thing. But moving from Omaha, Nebraska to Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario is not a huge culture shock. You shouldn't let the native-born Canadians know that I said this, because Canada's entire national identity, well, English Canada's entire national identity is founded on being not American. We are very not American, which is tricky if you're also American. So, but
you don't refer to yourselves as America's hat?
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. I have heard it said that we're North America's designated driver.
That's a pretty good. Have you not noticed many big cultural changes one way or the other then?
Not huge ones. The medical system is very different, and thank goodness. But I've been very sick in both countries, and Americans would be on the streets if they knew what they were missing. But Omaha to Kitchener, not really. We're, white, kind of self-effacing, self-doubting, mostly German-founded, Protestant-ish kind of things. There's a slightly different attitude towards the Queen, but that's about it. As opposed to, I lived in Miami, and Miami is much more different from Omaha than Kitchener is from Omaha. I think the regional differences inside of Canada and inside of the United States are much larger than the differences between the two countries generically. So, it happens that my region here matches my old region pretty well. So, yeah, I really don't feel like I moved that far, in comparison to people who change continents and languages and, move among people of different religions and different skin colors. I mean, those people have not always chosen, but those people are on a much different road than my immigrant experience, for sure.
It's one of those things that if life were longer and you had the option to live more of them, which is why when I hear theories about reality being a simulation, I really hope that's true, because I want to, exit this life at the distant future. I'm having a great time, but in the distant future, so far I can't even see it. Exit this life and immediately turn around and start another round. Like, oh, what a wonderful game that was! Let me be this character this time and get back in there.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, that sounds great.
Because I have no way to confirm that might actually be the case, and every reason to suspect is probably not. I feel that writing is in some ways a good way to achieve that by proxy, because I can have all of these experiences from the comfort of my nice office. I don't have a writing shed. So let's talk about the writing shed. I'm fascinated by this. I read that it has no Wi-Fi, and no phones. Is that?
Yeah. How am I talking to you then, right? It has an Ethernet cable. So every day at the end of the day, I hook up the Ethernet cable, and I leave it there long enough for all the computers in the house to sync up. So I have, and that way I don't lose work. That way the computer here backs up to the cloud. So I never lose more than a day's work, even if there's a crash. Because I have lost more than a day's work in the past, so now I am paranoid. But if you unhook the Ethernet cable, which is very easy to do, there's a little switch right behind me on the desk, then it's completely offline out here. Yeah, which is great. I love
I
that.
had a computer stolen, and I lost the first 10 chapters of the original version of Altogether Now, which, if it had been like 40, forget it, I'm not writing those again. Because it was just 10, I think it was just an opportunity to revise and improve and write a brand new version. But then I became a backup, what's the word, religious about backing up from then on. What's the most you've ever lost?
Half a novel. Same thing. It was a computer. My computer and my notebook and its external backup, because I was traveling, were all in one bag. And the bag was lifted out of a taxi or a van or something. I don't remember. But yeah, it was I think about 50,000 words, and I didn't rewrite it. I cannibalized parts of it and used it again in the future, but in a completely unrecognizable way. So I don't know. If anybody's been following me online for 15 years, I don't know that there is anybody, but I used to be writing this Aztec novel. I'm never going to write the Aztec novel. Yeah.
Oh, you never say never. I mean, it might come back to you someday, right?
No, but I used the part of it that really fascinated me. I used the idea of the Aztecs famously performed human sacrifice to keep the universe in order. And one of the sets of people that they sacrificed were kind of children who were raised to it in a really, they were half divine, very privileged, very nearly royal children who were raised in a life of privilege. And as far as you can tell from the fact that, they didn't survive to write their own story down, were willing to do this. And and then they turn 15 or whatever. I don't remember. It's been 15 years since I did the research. They reach a certain age, or the moment comes around and they're sacrificed to keep the universe in order. And I use that idea. In a science fiction setting. So that's the basic idea behind the Scorpion rules. Is these are literally the children of royalty who are being kept hostage to global peace. So there's an organization, there's a mad AI that runs something that calls itself the UN, that takes the children of royalty hostage. And if your country ever goes to war, then your royal kid gets the chop. A system which has worked for them to keep peace for 400 years. And so the lead character is one of these people who has for 7 generations been raised to this and is willing to go along with it. So I use the whole idea, and so I won't go back and use it again in its original setting. I scrapped it for parts. So.
Well, it sounds like, though, in your version, it kind of is effective. I mean, 400 years, that's
400 years
hard to argue with.
400 years of peace is hard to argue with. Yeah. It's kind of, it got the original jacket and packaging on it was very dystopian. It was very Hunger Games Divergent kind of packaging around it. And I'm like, really, guys? Because this is not a dystopia. This is a system that's working. It's a difficult world, but except for the 7 kids at the center of this, everybody else is getting a pretty good deal. And there's one of them who's the fish out of water, whose, country recently underwent a revolution, and he gets thrown in at the deep end, whereas all the rest of them have been raised to it. And he's like, let's overthrow the system! And they're like, A, should we? And B, can we? So his role is mostly to get his friends into danger and trouble. So he's, in any other book, he would be the hero. And in this book, he's kind of like, Elliot, sit down. Shut up. So, love him. He's very brave. He's very smart. But yeah, he's not as clued in as the rest of them. And so he manages to be both a monkey wrench and a kind of hero at the same time. He's interesting. But it's not his story. It's the other person's story.
And this may be a question you choose not to answer, which is perfectly fine. But were you able to resolve the philosophical question in your head of whether or not that's okay? That if you're one of the 7, you'll just take one for the team?
No, I mean, this is the big thing that this book is grappling with, and it's basically an unsolvable question, right? It's did you read The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas?
No.
No. Oh, you need to read that. It's a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Okay.
And when I say short, I mean it's maybe 5-10 pages. It's very, very short.
I can knock that one out this afternoon. You bet.
Yeah. It's the story of there's a town called Omelas, which is perfect. It's, this joyful, wonderful, perfect town in which everything is working well. Except, for some reason, the reason that it's working well is there's a child being kept in a cellar who's just so miserable and neglected that they're hardly human. And everybody who stays in this town knows this. But there are a few people who, when they come and they see this, they're shown this child at a certain point, and they're explained that this is why and how it works. And they look at this child and they get really quiet, and then after a while they pack up their bags and they walk away. And the last line of that story is, they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. Le Guin was, she's a hero. She's so good. So I think it's a basically unresolvable question. How much are we willing to ask other people to sacrifice, and how much should we sacrifice ourselves for the greater good? It's one of those questions that we all have to grapple with, but nevertheless, it doesn't have an answer. So, yeah, most of my books come down to something huge and like, what are we going to do about death? Kind of question. And they don't come up with an answer. They just come up with a story.
And I've read that you're working on a sequel to The Scorpion King. Is that right?
The Scorpion Rules. No, there are two of them.
When I say The Scorpion King with The Rock, oh my God, how embarrassing.
It's Scorpio Races is the one I usually get. People get those books mixed up so often that I expect the Water Horses to come out at a certain point. There are two of them, and they're kind of a diptych, and they stand by themselves. They're a mirror pair. I always kind of wanted to write a third one, but at this point, publishing being what it is, I don't think that's happening. I have a prequel, which may someday find its way into the world in one form or another, but I don't know. Publishing is weird. Publishing is hard. There's a certain number of things I can't say, but yeah, it exists and may someday find its way into the world. But I'm not working on that universe right now.
And this is something that interests me. We got off on a tangent early, and I didn't. Everybody's going to read your bio, so we're good. But something I wanted to ask you about is your first novel, Plain Kate, won the Canadian. I'm going to make sure I get this right. It's the Canadian Children's Literature Award, which is basically Canada's Newbery. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah. It's called the TD usually after the bank that sponsors it. The TD, Canadian Children's Literature Award? One of those two things. Yeah, everybody just calls it the TD. It's a big, shiny sticker that comes with a whole lot of money. Yeah, it's really.
You winning that for your debut novel.
It was
killing it, right?
What? Yeah, it
was
absolutely. It was. I don't know. I just won the Governor General's Award, which is the other really big Canadian award. And I have a feeling that I'm supposed to come to some kind of like writerly sang-froid about it. Like, there are so many wonderful books and it's an honor to be recognized by one's peer. But I'm totally not there. I'm totally like, oh yes! Thank you, writing gods! Thank you! I mean, I'm aware that it's kind of a crapshoot. I've been on the other side of awards juries, so, I'm aware that it is in no way an objective honor. Don't care. When you win it, it feels like, oil poured on your head by the priests of the gods. It's like, oh, yes, this is so good. The TD really was particularly fun because it's TD is a bank, the Toronto Dominion Bank. And so every year, used to be, it's in flux right now as TD reconsiders its commitments. But every year, the whole Canada children's literature community used to gather together, and you get all these children's authors and publishers and librarians and stuff attempting to wear ties and dresses and things, which is fun by itself. And instead of having, both the yellow cheese and the orange cheese, as you get at a really swanky literature function, you get a bank's budget. So it's this big space with a band and a sushi bar, and free drinks. And then you go in and there's this high production Oscar-like thing. And then they call your name.
Do you know going in for that one that you're going to be you knew going in you were going to be the winner, right?
Not for the TD. I knew for some of the smaller awards, but for the TD, they genuinely didn't tell me.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I think they were meant to. I got the "you absolutely must come to this" speech, but it was my first novel, so I didn't really read too much into it.
Do you have your fake "I'm so happy for you" clap all prepared?
Yeah.
So what? How long had? When did you write? I'm assuming that Playing Kate it's not the first book you've written because you've written some poetry. Is that the first piece of fiction? How many books in was that for you that you wrote that?
It was my. Everyone is going to hate me. It was my first piece of fiction, and it won a big award first time out. I know no profanity, but I have heard that I got up on stage and said, this is my first novel, and someone in the very back row went, they were swearing. And I'm aware that this is a response that writers will have. But yeah, I published my first attempt at a novel. I do not have a hidden novel in a drawer.
No, not me. There's I think something I've been fascinated by is one of my favorite shows is Rick and Morty. Everyone should watch it. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. And there's this wonderful episode. Was it the Rick Lannis mix-up? And they've got this wafer cookie in it that if you eat it, it's got fused with the experience of Rick. I think his daughter says, "I love you, Daddy," and they've captured that moment, that memory, and it's in the cookie. And every time you eat the cookie, you can re-experience that love. That's what I want. Give us the simple Rick wafer. Give us the experience of what it's like that for your debut novel to win big. You must have been on top of the world, right?
I was, absolutely. It was astonishing. It was really it's very strange because it is in a way a very quiet novel. It's a high fantasy with witch-burning mobs and big magic and monsters and stuff in it, but in a way it's a very quiet novel. It's about an orphan girl whose father was a woodcutter, a woodcarver, which my father is too. It's a Russian-favored fantasy. She's very quiet. She's highly skilled, but actually I always write these characters. When I was a kid, Star Trek, right? So there's Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, and I was firmly on Team Spock. I am always drawn to the characters who give you nothing but the occasional crack in the facade. I love to watch those people on the page, on the stage, on the screen. These people who are very shut down and contained, and then my editor will write in the margin, "What is she feeling?" And I'm like, "She doesn't know. And if she did know, she wouldn't tell you." So I've learned to put that on the page very slowly because every editor, I think, fell in love with Captain Kirk has been my experience. But I was very firmly on Team Spock. So this is one of these characters who's in a self-protective shell, who doesn't know what she's feeling. And it's a very quiet, meditative book. And then it was on a poster in every bank in Canada all Christmas long, and on billboards and the radio and the television. And it's like a baseball stadium full of people has read this tiny, quiet little book about an orphaned woodcutter girl and her talking cat. It's
odds are multiple people are reading it as we're talking. When you get to a certain size, right? Do you think about that sometimes? Just about how many people are probably reading something you've written right now?
No, that's a new thought and a terrifying one. Good
Well,
Lord.
there's one for about 2 a.m. tonight. 1 second. Give it some thought.
No, I sometimes think about, like, I'm going to a high school this afternoon. And because Plain Kate is, I guess it came out in 2011, it won an award, and it came out in 2010 and won an award in 2011. So when I go to high schools, I often run into kids who read this in like 6th grade. Less so now as the kids age out. But they'll be like, "You wrote that?" Which makes a real change from going to a bookstore and it's like, "Oh, would I have read anything by you?" I'm like, "No, you never heard of me. It's fine. Just don't ask, okay? We're not going to go through the whole thing where I list my things and you've never heard of any of them, okay? We're just going to move past that phase of the conversation." But the high school kids, sometimes I actually find one who's read it. And they're always just like, I think they're like me. They believe the books were basically written by unicorns. And so to have
you took dictation from a unicorn.
Yeah, is that how that works? I should have tried to capture one when I was still a virgin.
Well, how long did that book take you to write?
Oh, ages, like 6 years. In my defense, I wrote 2 books of poetry and had 2 children in those 6 years. But yeah, it was just, yeah, I think it took about 6 years to write it and another 2, 3 to get it, edited by my agent and then sold and then edited by my editor and then out into the world. So it's a long process for that first novel.
Did you have an agent for that one, or was that the book that you secured an agent with?
No, so that was the book I secured an agent with. I submitted it more or less over the transom. I went to the bookstore. I made a list of where I wanted my book to end up when it grew up, and whose agent I really wanted. And then I looked up all those agents. Now, this was 2008, so it wasn't super easy to find all those people. But I eventually did find out who represented everybody that I really loved. And I made a list of agents, and I queried my top one, and I got it. Again, a thing that is going to make people absolutely despise me. But there you go.
Well, haters going to hate. We don't have time for that.
Yeah, what are you going to do? It's not the usual publishing story. I'm very well aware of this. My husband is also a novelist, and his story looks nothing like this. His story is a much more typical story. So, but he doesn't hate me, and I take joy from that. So, or at least he hides it really well.
As I was looking over, like I said, stalking you online, doing my due diligence, making sure that I'm not squandering our opportunity by talking about Rick and Morty, when I could be asking you important questions. And I just saw award after award after award. I know you've just won the newest one here, the General Counsel's Award.
Governor General. The Governor General is the Canadian head of state.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yes, forgive my my Americanness.
No, it's fine. I don't think I'd ever heard of it before I moved north of the border either, but it's the big swanky one. It's like the National Book Award. It's, they give it in, I think, 7 categories. So there's fiction, poetry, playwriting, nonfiction, and children's literature in both illustration and text. So mine is the Children's or Young People's Literature Text Award. So yes, it's the big, swanky, put on a ball gown, go to the equivalent of the White House kind of award. That's next week. I have a ball gown.
Oh, yeah. That's very exciting.
I'm really excited. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, with something like that, there's this, I'm revealing how sad my mind works, little bits of pop culture get stuck in there. There's an old episode of Tiny Toons where the joke is Meryl Streep is winning another Oscar, and she doesn't get up for it. They bring it to her, and then she just drops it in her purse, which is overflowing with Oscars, and she just kind of yawns. Is there a point with all these awards where it ever feels like that, or is it always fresh and exciting every time?
It hasn't gotten old yet. I mean, it's only 5 novels deep. No, it's not old. It's they called me with this before they announced it to the public. So this one I actually knew about. But I wasn't supposed to tell anybody. I wasn't even supposed to tell like the rest of my family. But that was just a completely non-starter because I was being so uncharacteristically weird on the phone that everybody gathered around me to see if, either I'd won the lottery or someone had died. Something must have happened, right? But everybody did a really good job keeping the secret. So, no, it doesn't get old. It doesn't get old. I mean, you write. It's weird writing. It's you sit. I sit in this shed, and you can't see how small it is, but it's really quite small. I could almost reach out my hands and touch both walls. And it's quiet. It's very quiet out here. I sit out here and I talk to fictional people 3 days a week, and it's every once in a while they check in front of a gym full of high school students or a cocktail party full of publishers as if those were overlapping skills. But basically, I sit very quietly and talk to fictional people for years at a time. And it's not lonely, but it is singular. It is, this very quiet interior experience. But what you basically want from it is for the book to find other readers so that other people can have the other half of that experience. I create this character and then you read this character and somehow it meets in the middle and this person comes alive and, I actually like laugh at them or cheer for them or cry for them. And, so you need that experience, and getting the awards kind of means it's proof that you made at least one person have that experience. The judge picked yours. And it means that other people will find the books. The GG is the award in Canada that's like, my kids read this book. This is the first book that I've written that my children have read because it's for younger readers and they're getting bigger. The GG is the kind of award that means their kids might get to read this book. So no, it doesn't get old. It means a lot.
And so now when you come out to your writing shed, do you sit down and you say, okay, here I am, award-winning Erin Bow. This is no problem. Let's do it. Or do you still feel that same existential anxiety and fear when you get going? Or have you reached some kind of peacefulness because you know you're going to be read?
I'm still working for peacefulness. I'm such an imposter that I can't quite manage proper imposter syndrome. I actually know that I'm very talented. I also feel like I'm squandering it all the time. Like I'm not writing the right thing, or I'm not writing fast enough, or, it's that this will be the book where it finally all catches up with me. So I have faith in my talent, which almost seems like an external thing to me. Classically, I used to study Latin. And many people know this now because Elizabeth Gilbert pointed it out. But in Latin, genius is not a thing that you are, it's a thing that you have. It's an external, it's a friendly spirit, really. It's a muse. And sometimes it shows up and sometimes it isn't. So sometimes the muse shows up and sometimes it doesn't, but you just got to sit here and wait for it. And I actually feel like my talent is like that. It's like, it's just a gift. And but I don't always feel like I'm using it well. So that's my imposter syndrome, is not feeling like I'm using it well. And I don't know. I suppose there will probably never be a point where publishing just puts a gold star on my paper and says, hey, good job, you're using your life well. I think if you're writing for that reason, probably it's not going to work out. It's never going to be the thing that validates your parking here on planet Earth, I don't know.
We all love you now. You are complete.
Yeah, it really feels like a book contract should come with a rider that says, good job with your life. Way to go. And indeed, we everyone now loves you. You're done. do it again sometime if you feel like it, but it doesn't feel like that.
I wanted to ask you about some of these awards, specifically to circle back to something you'd said before. Well, also because it's fun to talk about awards. It's awesome. But you were talking about you had a prequel that you weren't sure would go anywhere because of where publishing is. And I know, obviously, anytime I say, what are your problems with publishing? It's like saying, would you like to commit career suicide? Go ahead. So that's not what we're going to do. But it does shock me sometimes when I talk to authors that I consider to be a big deal, that if anybody should be able to walk into the publisher's office and say, here, I've written this, publish it. But ma'am, no, don't but ma'am me. I have things to write. I'll be in my shed. You get on it. And I'm always shocked to hear that that's not the case. Certainly you have to have some kind of cachet. There has to be some things you could get done that other writers couldn't get done at this point, right?
Absolutely, there are. I have a really good agent, and I think she could probably get anything I wrote in front of the people that I would like to see it. I really do. It's like if I'm working on a middle grade now. I'm very happy with my middle grade editor, Kat. I am not shopping around, but I love her very much. But there are many middle grade editors that I admire. And if I wanted them to read this book, to read a manuscript and consider it, I could get that done. And that is not a privilege that you have as a beginning writer. Like just getting it read, just getting it out of the slush pile is just a huge step. It's a huge deal. So, I mean, yeah, there's stuff I can get done, but not everything. I mean, there will be, I get books turned down, not by all editors, but by some editors. I've never had a book that I couldn't publish. But yeah, I mean, I've pitched my dream books at dream editors and gotten no's, and and then they find some home somewhere else. And so far it's always worked out, but it's not a smooth road. I always try to tell people who aren't in publishing that it's kind of like selling a house. It's, you live in it, you work in it for a really long time, and then you make this big, objective and usually a financially big deal kind of transaction about it. So it's like that, except with more wild cards and uncertainty and opportunity for personal judgment. So if you think selling a house is fun, you will probably like publishing a novel. If you don't, then, buckle up, because it's a lot like that. But
I assume part of that metaphor is once you've sold the house, you can't complain when the new owners put something up on the lawn you don't like, or do some reconstruction.
Yeah. Well, once you've written a novel, it really belongs to its readers in any case. But yeah, I will occasionally complain to other author friends. It's like, oh, the cover, oh, the tagline, oh, why? But, they know what they're doing. I don't know how to market a book. So I let the people who market books. I mean, hats off to indie writers, to self-published writers who are doing it all for themselves. I've got like 9 people working on my book, at least, just to get it out into the world. And, and it still feels sometimes like it's just going to sink below the ocean of publishing, like a delicate little paper lantern, Like, oh, goodbye, beautiful book. So hats off to the people who can do it, but I'm not one of them. I don't know how to do it. So I try not to second guess those guys too much.
I just had this fantasy, and I've talked to enough authors now to realize that nobody has this fantasy. Probably Stephen King, J.K. Rowling don't have this fantasy. But I like to imagine that there could come a point in an author's career where an editor says, I think you should make this change. And then you sit across from them and you put your awards on the table and say, well, my little friends here say no. My little friends say we're doing it my way. And then that's the end of the discussion.
No, but I mean, you should be able to turn down any change you want from your editor. I mean, some of them are going to be deal breakers. Some of them are going to be like, well, then I guess we can't work together on this book. But ultimately, it has to be your book. If someone suggests a change to it that... You remember I was talking about the Scorpion rules? Is the story of this girl who's willing to go along with the system and this boy who's totally not? one of the earliest pieces of feedback I got from it was switch it. Tell it from the boy's point of view. You know, he's a fish out of water. It'll make it a lot easier to understand the system. It's much more typical of a Divergent Hunger Games, Pretties kind of style plot. Someone thrown in over their heads. You know, it'll just make the book a lot more commercial. And I'm like, yes, you're right. It would make the book a lot more commercial, but I'm not interested in that. You know, so you turn that piece of advice down. And that is a decision that cost me a professional relationship in a way. But it's, it was the right decision for the book. And it's not a book that landed badly. That's a book with Simon & Schuster. So I'm not sad about the decisions. But I also see where, the people giving me the advice are coming from. It really would have been a much more commercial, much more typical book if I'd flipped the whole thing, if I'd made it, from the boy's point of view, if the girl had fallen in love with the boy instead of her female best friend. This is a piece of advice that I also got is, why can't they just be best friends? Do they have to be gay? This is in 2010 or so. So
that's not
do they have to be gay was still an acceptable question.
If you told me 1956, I'd say, I guess. But that's too recent.
No, but you don't know how fast it's changed. I was told that it was, even in the 2 years it took me to finish it and get it to market, it went from being, oh, that's really going to limit the audience. Are you sure? To, no, I think we can use this as a hook. Just, there was almost nothing in 2010 that was, queer, young adult, and fantasy. The queer stuff was all still problem novels, and God bless her, Madeline Lowe's Ash. The Cinderella story. There's really very, very little. This is one of the first, and they packaged it. I'm going to reach behind me and grab it. Hang on.
Oh, sure.
Treat your readers to a view of my bookshelves.
I don't see the awards back there. Where are they?
Nope. Well, they're on the shiny, shiny books. Can you tell this is about lesbians on their goat farm?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I figured out.
That's exactly what I thought, right? So, the packaging is the packaging does not, this is the science fiction, they repackaged it for the paperback. So now it looks much more like science fiction and much less like dystopian, which I was very grateful for. I love both covers. I think both covers are great, but it certainly has got a science fiction cover, not a story. You can't even tell that it's about that it has a female lead. So it's very sub rosa in a way.
Is that something where you can weigh in, where you have this ideal cover? Me, award-winning Erin Bow.
I also don't know how to package books, so I try not to second guess that. Okay, here's the real deal. You get a certain amount of author tantrums you can pitch. It's definitely not more than one a book. So you can pitch a tantrum about your proposed cover if you really hate it, but you need to save it in case you need the tantrum later. So if it's reasonably close to what you wanted, then you should just go with it. No, I don't get a lot of input on covers. This one did have a proposed cover that I was like, ooh, I don't think so. And they changed it. But you don't get a lot of them. So I've been lucky in covers, actually, by and large. I have a couple of foreign editions where I'm like, I don't know what book that is.
Did I write that one?
It's my name on the cover, but it doesn't look like anything that I wrote. But, I'm lucky to have foreign editions at all, so I just kind of move on with that and make my peace.
Something I wanted to also make sure I ask you about, because this fascinates me about you, and I'd be kicking myself if I didn't ask you a little bit more, because we blew right past CERN, and I realized you were being a little bit self-effacing. Oh, it's just theoretical particle physics. It's not a big thing. But but your day job fascinates me because you're the science reader for the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. Probably that role has changed since I work there. How is that writing different from your fiction, and how is it possible that you can be so very right-brained and left-brained, or is that a myth that we've been taught and you can do both at the same time anytime you want?
Yeah, that's totally a myth. The right brain, left brain thing is, I don't know, it somehow entered pop psychology, but it has very little basis in neuroscience, and neuroscience is something I'm super interested in, so I am tempted to go off on a complete tangent. But instead, I'll just say that science is full of daydreamers. It's full of people who are just, living this sustained dream. There's one guy in our building who's reinventing quantum field theory, and one of these days I'm going to run him over in the parking lot. We have this kind of tally of which researcher is most likely to die in traffic. And, so there's this one really, really smart mathematical physicist who is literally rewriting the roots of quantum field theory, who's just lives in a little space of his own. Just a delightful human being. But
so to clarify for listeners, you're going to run him over because he won't see you coming, and you'll miss him, not because you're targeting him.
Not because no, just because he's wandering in traffic. He's a daydreamer, and Perimeter. It's not a big. There are about 150 scientists in the building on any given day, so it's not huge. It's not a university. But it has a chamber orchestra. We have that many classically trained musicians that's one of the things they do for fun. They have a chamber orchestra, and and they have a squash tournament, and they're always off to play hockey or off to play soccer or stringing up slack lines in the park and learning to juggle. I just was talking to one of the postdocs yesterday. She's gone off. I think she's a faculty member somewhere now, but when she was a postdoc recently. And she's become a world-class ultramarathoner. So, they're not just brains on legs. They're daydreamers who are deeply involved in the world. And it's fun to be with them. So, and on the other hand, so physicists can be very right-brained, or what you think of as right-brained, very wool-gathering, very interested in subtle and unseen connections and not straight ahead linear kind of thoughts. Whereas writers, sometimes you just got to go straight down the middle of your linear thought and tick off every single box. Sometimes it requires just intense logical concentration, maps and charts and, timelines and that kind of thing. So I think that's probably a myth. That our worlds are that far apart. Usually our academic training is that far apart, but our brains aren't really that far apart.
Something that really interested me is I read part of an interview with you that you said that when you were younger, you were trying to decide whether you wanted to be a theoretical physicist or you wanted to be a writer. What? Those are the choices? Was the third one, I don't know, Olympic athlete? That's something else. What was it that made you choose science, and then what was it that brought you back to writing? Or have you ever had to choose? Have you always had both?
You go off to university and it's really hard to major in both. Theoretical physicists and only theoretical physicists are probably going to care when I say I'm actually more interested in the experimental side because I like to get my hands dirty. There's a cultural divide. I was just reading a introductory article to something. I don't remember what, but the introductory article started this is an introductory text, which means it's suitable for experimental physicists or theorists who don't mind getting caught reading something dumb. And I'm like, okay, this is the culture of physics in a nutshell. The theorists look down on the experimentalists, and the experimentalists are like, yeah, you come over here and lay cable trays. You try it, bucko. What are you doing over there? You're not doing any experiments. So I like the experimental side of things, but I worked with theorists now. What on earth was I saying? Oh, you can't major in both. I tried. I really tried to major in both, but at a certain point you have to pick. And I picked physics because I figured I could keep writing on my own, whereas physics is something that's quite difficult to do on your own. Especially, high energy particle physics is not something you can just set up in your backyard. So yeah, I picked physics. Then I went to graduate school, where a number of things happened to me, including getting quite sick. But my eventual realization was I like learning about physics a lot more than I like actually doing physics. I like that moment of understanding. I like grappling with a big idea, with an experiment, or just with a text until something comes clear in my head. I love that. Doing it, not so much. When I worked at CERN as a graduate student, you may have heard there's a big experiment called CMS, the Compact Muon Solenoid. You've seen pictures of it. It's huge. It's this big, round, space-age looking thing. It's like 3 stories tall, and it's all made of tiny little Lego blocks about yay big. And they're all glued together, right? So I was the person who tested the glue to make sure it wasn't going to melt in the high radiation environment.
That's an important job.
It's an important job, and one you should give to your junior graduate students. I would like to point out that it has not melted in the high radiation environment. Go team. But that's really not a lot of fun. That kind of the endless grind of it is not a lot of fun. The endless bashing your head against a problem that's stumped people for, how long were we looking for the Higgs boson? About 40 years. Really not a fabulous, some people just thrive on that. Some people thrive on impossible problems, and some people write novels. So I have found that what I really like now in physics is I get to grapple with those big outside ideas, these big cutting edge ideas, without actually having to bash my head against the math for 5 years at a time, or actually having to, stay up all night and do experiments for 10 years at a time before you get to some kind of conclusion. So I just interviewed Carlo Rovelli, who wrote 7 Brief Lessons of Physics. He's really good. And he has this brand new idea about black hole to white hole transitions. And so I spent a couple weeks reading papers on black hole to white hole transitions and on loop quantum gravity until I get enough of an idea of it in my head that I can put it on paper in 1,000 words. And that is a great joy. That is just building that kind of understanding for myself is a great joy. And building it on the timeline of a writer is much more satisfying for me than building it on the timeline of a researcher, where you only get that experience once every, I don't know, I think Rovelli's been working on this project for 4 or 5 years now. So,
as opposed to a novel, I don't know, how long does a novel take you to finish?
Depends on the novel, but 4 or 5 years doesn't sound completely out of whack. 2, 1, 2, realistically 2. I'm writing 2 at the moment, and they've each been going for about 1.5 years, and they're each about half done. So I'm fascinated by this. In part, it's you're Blade the Daywalker. You're walking in both worlds, because you're working at perimeter part of the time, and you're going in there. So how is that different writing there, and how does your approach to writing change with that versus when you're in your garden shed, and it's time to write your next novel? They're really quite different. They have words in common, clearly. They're both crafts that are basically made out of words. But like this Rovelli piece that I just did, it's about 1,200 words long. And it took me a couple weeks to really nail it, because most of it is, building a new understanding in my head. And, that understanding is out there. I don't need to create it. I just need to attain it somehow. Whereas I think writing is a lot more like being a researcher. It's much more putting your time in and slowly discovering things. I don't know, we want to talk plotters versus pantsers, which I think is an artificial distinction. I never outline. I've tried so hard. I think it would probably make my life easier if I could do it. Sorry, I'm making sure my dog isn't eating that. No, she's not. There's a there's an ice melting salt on the deck, like a bag full, and I don't know if it's safe for animals. And I would really hate to see her eat a bag full of salt in any case. And she's a moron, so she might. She seems fine. Okay.
Even safe, it seems like just a bad idea.
Yeah. So I think being a writer is a lot more like being a researcher. It's, I'm one of those writers, I think a better distinction than plotter versus pantser is like into inductive versus deductive writers. You know, there are inductive writers who write from an outline and then discover the details in that outline that they need to put in each scene, right? So you know what you need the scene to accomplish, and then you deduce what you need. I might be getting induction and deduction backwards. Anyway, you figure out from knowing what you need the scene to do, what you need to put in the scene. And then there are people like me who like write the scene and then figure out what the scene is supposed to do. And find the little details in the scene which suggest the next scene. I can't write from an outline. I have to, you know, find the little details that inspire the next idea. I think that's probably much more how scientists work. So, you know, as a science writer, I'm writing from somebody else's ideas, and as a writer, I'm discovering my own. So really, they're almost mirror opposites. And the only thing they really have in common is, you know, the process comes out in words. So it's a great joy for me to get to do both. You know, having a day job, even a half-time day job, does take some of the pressure off trying to, you know, finish a book when you don't quite know how the book ends. You know, I don't feel like I have to do that now that I have a day job. Yay! On the other hand, I really should finish this book.
The royalty track doesn't pull up every 6 months and just beep, 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 and we dump the money.
So, yeah, it takes some pressure off, and it gets me out of my head a little bit. And, you know, and I finish an article every couple of weeks, whereas so you get a little gold star from the universe. It's like, well done, you accomplished a thing. Whereas if you're relying on that for novels, they don't come very often. So it's nice to have deadlines that are more than once every 18 months. And it's nice to have colleagues, and it's nice to get out of the house. So I enjoy my day job. What I wish is that there were like 10 days in the week. You know, if I could write for 3 days, I go to Perimeter for 3 days, and then I write for 3 days, and then I have 2 days on the weekend. What does that make? 8? I'm bad at this. You know, I could write for 5 days and then have 2 days on the weekend. That sounds perfect. That sounds fabulous. I would love that. But sadly, no one put me in charge of time. So.
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
But keep going. We'll see how it shakes out.
All right. One of the things we're going to change about time is this time around, we're not going to let the morning people set the social schedule just because they got there first. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to stay up till like 2, 3 in the morning, and then we're going to set the social schedule. And it's going to say you need to be productive until like 2, 3 in the morning, and then you can sleep as long as you want. And all the morning people are going to be, my body doesn't work that way. And we'll be like, too bad. So
I assume that's one of the secret things that's happening at CERN. Is that they're working on that. Sooner or later, we're going to have the mist come out and cover the world with monsters. And that's where it started.
CERN is like a trailer park of science. There is nothing glamorous at CERN. It's a hodgepodge of, you know those buildings on your university campus that are like built of cinder block and barely finished on the inside? All right. So about like 50 of those sprinkled on a field in France, you know, and with a big fence around it for unknown reasons. Well, partly because an international border runs down the middle of it. But yeah,
I assume to keep out the terrorists that want to unleash the mist.
Probably. And the people who want to try the skydiving from one of the Rob David Brown books had people skydiving and antimatter at CERN. And I'm like, I spent a lot of time at CERN, and I'm fairly sure there was no skydiving facility. But okay. No, it's just, I mean, it's graduate students and postdocs and, people from all over the world spending 7 months away from their family, and drinking terrible cheap Swiss beer. And we do have there was a very nice croquet lawn on which international croquet tournaments were occasionally played. I don't know the rules of croquet. I spent a long time trying to deduce the rules of croquet and didn't succeed. But that was probably the most glamorous part of CERN when I was there.
I had this. I have had so many theories about how writing might work. That's what I like to do. I do some research, but then I also like to tell myself little stories about how maybe the world's this way. Let's not verify it. Let's assume that's cool. Mm-hmm. But I talked with Susan K. Quinn, who's a wonderful author who is a former rocket scientist with NASA. I talked with Dr. Padma Venkataraman, who is a former top oceanographer and current professor and scientist, and some other scientists along the way. This is episode, I don't know, 58, 59, somewhere in there. We've done a lot of shows, lots of great guests. Go check them out, esteemed audience. Listen to them all. They're amazing. But when I'm talking with these women who have this background in science, I mean, that's not easy stuff. That's not sleep in late, come in, have my shirt half untucked the way I used to do when I was managing a Subway on the weekends. This is serious stuff. Does that discipline, you think, that you've developed? I've noticed this trend that these brilliant scientific minds are now writing brilliant books and having a great deal of success. And I'm wondering if there isn't some overlap where that training of both your mind and your work ethic translates over to your writing career and provides some sort of benefit that way.
Maybe. I mean, I had this gap in the middle where I was definitely of the shirt untucked brigade. And then I wrote a bunch of poetry. So, I don't know, it's hard for me to think of it in terms of work ethic. But I tell you what the real connection is between science and writing. It's the ability to bash your head against something for a really long time until you uncover something interesting about it. For example, let me grab a clip tissue here. Like when I was a kid, I was really interested in science. I wanted to be a physicist. I did not understand what that meant. Still don't, to a certain extent. And I remember asking my fifth grade science teacher or something. My fifth grade teacher wouldn't have been a science teacher. Like, why does a ball roll down a hill? It's got potential energy when it's at the top of the hill. It's got kinetic energy at the bottom of the hill. What makes the kinetic energy better than the potential energy? Why does it always roll down, right? And she's like, well, sweetie, that would be the gravity. And I remember making little charts of this because I understood that that's what scientists do is they make charts and put them on corkboards and take them to science fairs, right? So I made little charts about this and put them on corkboards and took them to science fairs, and people were like, well, sweetie, that would be the gravity. Did you build a robot or something, or a volcano out of baking soda? I'm like, no, I'm really interested in this ball thing. Okay. So I went to high school and I had a really excellent science teacher. She was fabulous. And I remember asking her, why does this ball roll down the hill? What's the difference between the potential energy and the kinetic energy? And she's like, well, that's entropy. We're really not going to cover it in high school science, but here's a book you could go look up, and these are the laws of entropy, and these are the laws of thermodynamics, and this is how the universe works. Is this potential energy turns into motion, and then the motion turns into disorganization, and that's how that works. And you're like, okay. So you get to university, and they're like, okay, entropy. Here's how entropy works, and you take a whole class on thermodynamics, or at least half a term on thermodynamics, and you learn the laws of entropy, and you get some some grasp on how that works and statistical mechanics and all this stuff. And you figure you've pretty much got the ball nailed. And then you get to graduate school and you ask, okay, the ball rolls down the hill with the entropy. And they're like, well, yes. But entropy contains an arrow of time. And almost nothing else in physics contains an arrow of time. Almost nothing else in physics contains a preference for whether the film is running forward or backwards. Very little. In fact, it may all be an illusion. We're not sure that it's real at all, time, as we experience it. And I'm like, wait, what? I was done. I was good with the entropy. They're like, yes, but, and then you get these, you get really off the deep end of theory. And that's where you start finding things that are new. Just by bashing your head against this simple question for years at a time. So I think learning to bash your head against a simple question until you find the thing about it that's really kept you going on it is an excellent skill for writers to have. Being in always a little bit over your head, and trying to do something impossible is an excellent skill for writers to have. The people I work with now at Perimeter, they're trying to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity. It's one of the many things that they're trying to do, but many of the people in the building are trying to do that. The best minds in the world have been trying to do that for 80-some years. 80 years. 3 scientific generations at least. And at this point, we have 2 decent guesses, and that's it.
And does that excite you that this could be eventually the one, and then 80 years of stalemate? You're welcome, Erin Bow, award-winning author, out. Or does it fill you with a sense of despair? 80 years, obviously this isn't something that's going to happen. What are we doing here?
No, I think, there's a feeling of like community and continuum about it, that you have to be willing to bash your head against something impossible so that you can do some tiny piece of it. It's unlikely that anybody in the building is going to go, oh, here we go. This is how string theory works, and this is exactly how it predicts everything about the universe, and here is our unification of quantum mechanics and gravity. This is perfect. I mean, is this going to happen? No. We're going to get a little piece here, and a little piece there, and a little bit, and a little thing. And, there's always a possibility that we'll have a new Einstein who will just have a new story to tell. But most of us are, writing a novel that talks to other novels, that are, writing, one little piece of the story. I keep writing about ghosts. I've finally written a comedy, but it's set in a funeral home. So I keep writing this, what do we do about death story. Am I going to come up with an answer for what we do about death and the fact that we're mortal? Probably not. But can I continue that conversation? Sure. And might I come up with some tiny piece of it that's new or that helps other people think or move forward in theirs? I think that's possible. I think that's really possible. So, I think that's the connection is, being part of a community and trying something that's just totally impossible and trying to move it forward just inch by inch by inch.
Do you have faith that, 50, 200 years, as fast as technology moves, 5 years, that at some point it's possible that somebody could come up with an alternative to death, be that, what is that, not Elon Musk, the theory, the I can't think of the term for when we can pass on to robots and we become robots and then it's not a problem anymore?
Transhumanism, or the singularity. Mm-hmm. So the Scorpion Rules and the Swan Riders are about transhumanism and the singularity. And in my book, of course, it turns out to be at the very least, complicated idea, if not an outright bad idea. I don't know. What those. I don't pay a lot of attention to. I like neuroscience a lot, but it's it's something that I just read about. It's not something that I do or have any expertise or talk to experts in. But the more I read, the more I'm like, you guys don't have any idea what's going on in the brain. Just none. We just, we're barely scratching the surface of how the mind works. the idea that we might be able to synthesize it somehow and encode it and move it, I think that could be quite a ways off.
Well, the thing that bothers me about that is even if you can do it perfectly and you put all of my brain and my essence in this new robot, that robot that thinks it's me is going to have a nice life. I'll be here dying. Bye. You have a wonderful time. Hook up with the robot they made of my wife. You guys are going to get along fabulously. But you're working on the problem of how to potentially overcome this issue of death at some point. Where's the smart money? Where are you thinking that we might find a solution?
I don't think there is a solution to death. I think we're mortal and we die and it means something. And what and how we cope with it is one of the great human questions. And I don't think technology has the answer to it. I mean, suppose we were all suddenly immortal. Does that sound like a bad idea?
Well, I've always heard that, and I'm a skeptic on this point, because I always hear that the reason that life is so wonderful is because it's finite. It has an ending, and that makes all of this more special. And I say, yes, but isn't that exactly the argument that a person that has no say in the matter would have to make to live peacefully with it? If there's never been the other option, if there was, let's try it. Let's see how it goes. Maybe after the first 500 years, you know what, I was wrong. This is awesome.
Yeah. Well, exactly. As we probably won't know until we can compare. I mean, I'm not a fan of death. I'm not gonna argue the pro-death side of the. But I do think the fact that we die and essentially that we lose other people along the way is one of the great human questions. That I don't think it has a solution. I've written novels with ghosts in them. I've written novels with the afterworld, and I've written transhuman novels, and they always kind of circle back around this. It's like, what do we do with the stuff that we can't do anything with? And every book is a conversation with that, but none of the books have an answer, really. And I don't know that technology is ever going to have an answer either. I mean, assuming we could do it tomorrow, assuming we could upload our brains into computers, does that change us fundamentally? Does it change who we are as people? Who are we without our sensory apparatus? Who are we without our bodies? I don't know. And it's always going to be some of us. We have never created a society where everyone is having the same experience. So there's always going to be some people who get it and some people who don't. And what does that do to us? So I think it's a fun fictional conversation to have. I don't think it's right over the technological horizon, but it's not my expertise, so I don't really know. I will tell you though, history of computing. They keep saying we're going to have a computer with human-like intelligence in 20 years. And they've been saying that since about 1950.
I also love that that's the standard is human intelligence. I'll wait till they get one that's past it. Give me the smarter computer. Well, you're writing about ghosts, so I think it's fair to ask, do you have some idea of what you can expect when death comes? Is it just the lights went out? I don't know what happened anymore. I'm not existing, but I'm not bothered because I don't know that there was ever a me, so it's not a problem. Or do you think that there is something beyond?
I don't know. I was raised Catholic. My sister used to say you can't ever recover. You can only reupholster. And I'm still, in a sense, a person of faith, but I'm more like a seeker who hasn't found anything. And every once in a while, I write stuff down about that. So I don't know. I think about it quite a bit. The more so since my sister, who I was just talking about, died 15 years ago. God, doesn't seem like it should be 15 years ago. But yeah, so I didn't start being obsessed with death then, but it certainly didn't help, And I've been very ill, and I've seen people die. I'm a kid who grew up I went to university in the early 90s, and hung out with the gay boys, and a lot of them died. So I've seen it all my life. And I don't know what we do with it, and I don't have any idea what's next. I think the people who do have some idea what's next have basically just convinced themselves, and they win. The people with faith win. They have great comfort in, knowing that they're going to some kind of beautiful next world where God loves them. That's great. They win. Doesn't seem to be something you can just will yourself to have. It's, once you start doubting, it's hard to get rid of that.
It does strike me as fascinating that that in some death situations, your brain will trigger a release of DMT, so you'll begin hallucinating. And so, some people will be dying. Oh my God, I really do see there's Grandma up there in the clouds with the harp, and I'm coming, Grandma, let's do this. And even if that's just a moment of hallucination, and then boom, consciousness obliterated, don't worry about it. What a nice thing to have.
It's lovely, isn't it? It's like, good job, neuroscience. Absolutely. You have to wonder about that from an evolutionary point of view. It's like, what was it? Like, if you just consider evolutionary pressures, if really nothing exists that isn't either random or adaptive, right? Which is a big open question. I don't know. What is that adaptive to? Why would you want death to be pleasant? But it seems to be. Everyone I know who has ever worked in hospice or who has been around a lot of dying people says it's usually peaceful, even joyful. And I'm like, okay, well, very glad to know that. That sounds nice. But the scientist in me is like, the little antelope that's running away from the cheetah and then it gets snatched. Is it having a joyful death? And if so, why? Because wouldn't it want to keep struggling and keep running away just on the chance that might work? Wouldn't terror and fear be better adaptive?
Maybe they have overwhelming kindness. I saw you over there looking hungry. I'm so glad you're going to get to eat. How satisfied are you going to be after I'm in your tummy?
So.
It's I wanted to follow that up because now we've talked about dying and what happens afterward. Oh, how wonderful! But I didn't forget. Esteemed audience thinks I did, but I didn't. What kind of creepy stuff happened at that cabin?
Oh, the cabin in the woods. Okay. So Sorrow's Knot is my horror novel. I don't read horror novels because I am super easily creeped out. You said Banucula wasn't scary, but I read it when I was like 6 and had to hang a cross over my bed to keep the vampire rabbits away.
For the record, I love Banucula, just not that scary. I don't want to get angry, fans. You call yourself a middle grade ninja and you don't love Banucula. I do. It's great.
Yeah, anyway, I was scared by it. That is my level of tolerance for creepy books. Okay, it was set early and it was set low, so naturally I wrote one. And it's about, it's a world in which not all shadows, but any shadow can contain this sort of hungry, amorphous force, some of which used to be human. And the ones that used to be human can watch and wait and plot. And if they touch you, you're in big trouble. So it's this world, it's set in the forest. There's a meadow in the forest, and it's surrounded by a big fence made out of strings because the dead are repelled by these kind of cat's cradle-y kind of actions and rhymes. And it's a deeply creepy novel. It's the novel where I had to always keep track of where the sun was so that I could keep track of where the shadow was. And you just become hyper aware of, shadows and movements that you can't source. Like if you see something moving out of the corner of your eye, you don't just assume that's, sometimes you read something, it's like you're reading it in December, but it's set in the summer, and then you go outside and it's cold and you're surprised.
Mm-hmm, sure.
So I was having that experience, but over a long period of time. I was like deeply immersed in this world where the shadows were going to kill me. So naturally, I rented a cabin in the woods.
Good thinking.
Yeah, I had a deadline. My kids were really little, and I had this intense deadline. So I'm like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to rent a cabin in the woods. I didn't have this office then, so I was like, we're going to run away and we're going to finish this book. So I rented this little cabin on the Otter River down on Lake Erie, and literally in the woods. And I was writing one night at the kitchen table. And the house is lit up from the inside, which means you can't see outside, right? You can only kind of see the trees. And there's this kind of sense of bulk and the sense of movement outside, but you can't see out the window. And I'm writing in this little lit up room late at night, no one around. And I get to the part where the white hand, the amorphous force, has got them kind of pinned down in the corner. And then there's a knock at the door. I screamed so loud. I just, it was the cabin owner. It was the guy that I'd rented it from coming to make sure that I was doing okay out there. And it's one of those moments where I'm like, having a gun in the house is a bad idea, children. I totally just fired randomly through the window out of fear. I was so terrified because I'd spooked myself already and I was all tense and all worked up. And, already literally afraid of my own shadow. And this, the door is right there. This is a tiny little house. So it was, it couldn't have been 3 feet away from my head. And all of a sudden there's someone there and a big noise and this, I thought for sure I was going to die. And I had to talk him out of, like, I'm a novelist. We're all like this, really. It's fine.
First time I read Salem's Lot, I was living in my first apartment, and my college buddy knew I was reading it. And of course, in that book, the vampires float up to the windows and they knock on the window and say, "Let me in," and they wait for that invitation. And as soon as you say, "Yeah, come on in, you're my friend. You haven't recently died or anything, right? I mean, you're flying, but otherwise it's cool." And then they attack you, and that's. Spoilers, that's Salem's Lot. Anyway, my buddy knew I was reading that, and there was just enough space from the porch to my bedroom window that he could stretch out, and I was on the 3rd floor, so he was risking life and limb for this, but he could knock on my bedroom window and poke his head over, and this is the most scared I've ever been. I fell out of bed. Oh my God.
That's just cruel.
He had that feather in his cap forever. I don't know that it was worth the risk he took, but he still brings it up occasionally. You remember that time I got you more than you'll ever get me? Like, yeah, no, you win. I don't have anything scarier for you. Have you ever had a paranormal experience, or are all your ghost stories theoretical?
All my ghost stories are theoretical, yeah. I have had dreams I can't explain, and when you talk to people, they have had experiences that they can't explain. It doesn't surprise me as a scientist that certain things about the world are inexplicable or unexplained, at least. I think we know 10% of what we really need to know to get around in the world. So, but no, I've never had something that like just convinced me that there is an afterlife or alien life or ley lines or extrasensory perception or any of those things.
So I've never seen a flying saucer. The esteemed audience knows I have to ask that question because
I always have to. I had a telescope when I was a kid, and I once saw like a string of falling stars moving slowly, and I never figured out what that was. And that's a fairly common sighting, like 5 or 6 lights in the sky moving in formation and slowly, but not an airplane. So I did see that. It wasn't like, oh my God, what the heck is that? It was like, that doesn't look like anything that you expect to see in the sky when you're used to looking at the sky. I still can't tell you what that is. So I guess kind of. On the other hand, I have worked with scientists. I have worked at Los Alamos, not the bomb part. I am absolutely convinced that if scientists had found aliens, we would know about it by now.
Why is that?
Oh, just the idea of like 200 people keeping a secret like that is just boggling. No way.
I think they're terrible at it. I think that's why we have constant leaks.
Well, you gotta admire the faith of the conspiracy theory people in like organizational structures.
Oh, sure.
I'm like, wow, you your fantasy government is a lot more efficient than my fantasy government.
Well, I think that's part of what makes conspiracy theories so attractive, especially like if you're talking about like the assassination of John F. Kennedy. How terrifying to think that a guy can just get a rifle and just do that, just change the entire course of the nation. How much more satisfying and how much more assuring to know that no, there are secret reptilian people that control everything. You can't see them or know their motives, but chill, they got this. Go about your business.
Yeah, it's less random, right? It's way less random, and in a way, it's more under control. It's just not under your control. I think in a way, it's comforting to people. You know, I've been reading a lot for a project, mostly about survivor's guilt, and you know, the basic thing about survivor's guilt is, I think human beings would rather feel guilty than feel helpless. Right? I think we would rather feel like this is somehow our fault than like we had no control. I think that's the basic root of survivor's guilt. Could be wrong about that, you know, but that's kind of what I'm coming around to. So
I'm sure there's a bit of a case-by-case basis with it, but sounds solid to me. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know I'm talking your face off, and I don't want to keep you talking forever, but I did have a couple of things that I specifically want to ask you about, because only, not only you, but I think would be, you would be the person that I could best get the answer from. One, I wanted to ask you about writing about science specifically for the young adult market now, and now middle grade as well, and your world building, because obviously, as we've demonstrated aptly over the course of this conversation and by your bio available online right now, you've got a higher level of understanding of knowledge, certainly physics, than your average person. I wonder if there's some isolation, walking around talking with the rest of us who don't have that, where you don't know some of the things that I know. I don't know if there's some separation, but then that has to be magnified a little bit more when you're writing for younger readers who maybe certainly don't have the same scientific training. So how do you talk about science for younger readers in a way that satisfies you, but that is still relatable for them, that they're still going to be able to grasp, and that doesn't get in the way of the simple joy of the story?
Mm-hmm. I think you're going to be disappointed in me. Because my criteria for really good world building is that it hang together, not necessarily that it be like faithful to the universe. So like my transhuman characters in the Swan Riders and the Scorpion Rules, so they're transhuman intelligences, they're artificial silicon computer digitized intelligences that can possess other people through specialized implants that some of these other people have. And that works by hand-wavium and magnets. There's a set of rules set out in the book about who they can do it to, what kind of equipment they need. You know, they're not just hopping from person to person. You know, and they have to have the implants and et cetera, et cetera. But like, basically, this is a story about demonic possession with a layer of hand-wavium and magnets on top of it. You know, it hangs together. It hangs together really well. Like it's all the rules are laid out, and you know the plot exploits the rules in interesting ways. And you know, I figured it out as I went around, and I think people will find it very satisfying and very complete as a universe. But it's not like, you know, Discworld or something where you're going to, or not Discworld, excuse me, Ringworld. It's not like, you know, the great science fiction, Silver Age science fiction where you're going to learn about what exactly it takes to construct a Dyson sphere and why we might want to do that. It's, you know, it's much more like, what if demonic possession were real with hand-wavium and magnets? You know, every once in a while I get just totally off the loop about some piece of research, you know, so like in Scorpion Rules, so these are my science fiction books, so it's more relevant there. In Scorpion rules, they're using magnetic launched ships. They're launching off a magnetic rail for suborbital craft because they're a post-fossil fuel society. And, so I got really into magnetic rail launches. I'm like, what we really need in this world is like a Lofstrom loop, which is a magnetic rail that goes up to space. So to launch things into space, you have this standing, part. It's literally called a Lofstrom loop. You can look it up. And then I got 5-6 days of research deep on that before I realized that none of the characters care about how the magnetic rail works. None of them, any more than the characters in my contemporary novel care about how the internal combustion engine works. I just have to show it working. And maybe I have to know the rules for it, so I know how fast you can get from A to B and whether someone from B can come to A in an unexpectedly short period of time. But, I don't have to, write down the rules for eddy coils or anything like that. So, there's not a lot of science, even in my science fiction. There's a lot of internally consistent world building, but not a lot of science. I'm really much more interested in stories. So even my science fiction basically has the same rules as my magical systems. They're just internally consistent, even if they're not necessarily plausible.
Is that maybe partly because you get it out of your system when you're with your work for the Perimeter Institute? All right, I've done science, now fun.
Maybe so, or maybe it's spite again. Maybe I'm, reacting to reading Silver Age science fiction like Larry Niven when I was, a kid in the 80s and going, this entire bit is boring. This is like the whale blubber scene in Moby Dick. I don't care how the whale blubber works. I want back to the story. So I leave all the technical stuff out. Sometimes I know it. Sometimes it's just something that's worked out very carefully somewhere in the background, but it hardly ever lands. It hardly ever lands on the page. The thing to do, I think, is to filter it through what the characters care about. So the characters care about, what's happening to them, which means they don't care about how the spaceships get from place to place. They care a lot more about how the demonic possession thing works, because that's much closer to home. But they really don't care about how the spaceships get up. So my world building tends to be a little bit, I guess, softer than that. So, yeah. I mean, I like a good hard science fiction novel, but I'm more interested in people than I am in machines. So.
You keep a separate file where you write down all the rules of your universe, or
yeah,
how do you do that?
If I turn you around, which I can't because it's a big screen, you can see the pin board here where I have all the rules for the thing that I'm working on right now. It's got maps and there's a set of how you strap into this set of physical controls and what your right hand does and what your left hand does, and sketches of the creatures, and so there's kind of a reference board over here so that I can keep it all consistent. Yeah, there's big files. I use Scrivener, which I think everybody should. It's great. So that lets you keep it in the same box.
I have friends who use Scrivener. I'm an old man and I still like my Microsoft Word. What about, sell us on Scrivener? What are the advantages that we Word users are missing out on?
For a start, you can keep all your research in the same document as your novel. So when I was researching, the book I'm just researching, the Mongolian book, I can have all the pictures next to the scenes that I'm writing about. So if I'm writing a scene about how to put a hood on an eagle, I can have next to that scene a little video clip of someone putting a hood on an eagle. And it will stay there and it will be embedded there permanently. The other thing that's great about it is the search function. So I can search the entire document for someone's name. or every time I use, a particular word or a phrase, sometimes I'm like, I really like this phrase and I should put it in the book somewhere. Have I yet? So it's a more powerful search function than Microsoft Word. It'll give you like a list of every scene in which so-and-so's name is used. And then you can just click through it. And then you can move the scenes around. That's the thing that I used to screw up in Microsoft Word, is I would color code the scenes. Like some of them would be blue and some of them would be purple, and that would mean something to me. But this I can actually tag metadata on top of the scene, so I can go like, this is a draft and I still need to do X with it, and then move it from place to place as the story shifts around. So it works for me. But I do a lot of moving. I don't write books in order. So I have a scene here and a scene there, especially in the sand pile phase in the first draft. And so it's really helpful to be able to keep track of things scene by scene and move things around.
And that comes back to, you mentioned you don't outline very tightly, but you do some kind of plotting. At what point do you start to put those scenes in order, and at what point are you assembling a book as opposed to just writing around a little bit of everything?
It's a mess at this point. But it's worked 5 times now, so I guess I'll call it a process.
It's doing all right.
It's going okay. I get an idea. I get something a little bit more than a premise, a little bit less than a actual plot. I call it the original equipment. So the original equipment for Plain Kate is, there's an orphan girl who's a wood carver who is forced to sell her shadow. She gets a talking cat. Not a plot, and not quite a premise because there's no story there, but Act 1, right? And the characters and, what's going to happen there. And it's enough to get me to the end of Act 1. At which point I get super, super stuck and stay there for a couple months and consider getting a job in a bank and just flail and bang my head against the wall.
If anybody could get a job at a bank, I assume it's you. Remember when you had my book in the lobby? Where's my office?
Gee, please hire me. Where's my office? Here's my sticker. Yeah, does it come with an office, the sticker? Good to know. Yeah, then I get really stuck and I sort of feel my way forward. I generally just follow the characters around until they do something interesting that feels like the next plot piece of the book, and then I write Act 2. And then I get stuck again, because I usually don't know the ending. Often I think I know the ending, which is what gets me writing towards the ending and writing Act 2. But then I'm wrong, and then I get stuck again, and bash my head against the wall for a while, and then eventually have some kind of moment where I'm like, oh, wait, there's Act 3. And so it's in chunks. And then revision is my chance to make me look like I did it all on purpose. So in revision, I move it around and I'm like, okay, if this is going to happen in Act 3, then I need to seed it all the way through. And, this would happen in this order and this character can go entirely. So, my first draft is a mess. It's a real sand pile of a thing with false leads and, loose places. And so revision is where it all starts kind of moving around and coming together. It's not an efficient process. But, everybody's process is a little bit different, and I guess this is mine. So
I always joke that if I talk to 2 or 3 successful authors that all tell me we do things exactly this way, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and do what they're doing. But I haven't had that conversation yet.
Well, and people will always give you the rules for writing. You have to get up and you have to write every day, or you have to write 1,000 words a day, or you have to write first thing in the morning. Or it's been my experience that there is no one right process, even just for me. My process works for a while and then it stops working, and then I have to find something new. And it took me a while to stop feeling like a failure about that. But, what works is what works. And the rules, I don't know. It's like parenting. You've got a wee person. Everybody has strong opinions about parenting because no one is sure they're doing it right. And they'd all really like to be certain. So I think writers can be like that.
Oh, no, I am. Save this podcast, esteemed audience, when my son is president. You know, that's too low a bar. When he has cured cancer, you're welcome. Great parenting.
Yeah.
I tell you what, two more questions, and let's call it a day. I have talked your face off, and I know you have writing yet to do, and then you've got a school visit, you've got a full day. Two questions for you, and then first question is why write for younger readers with all the writing you could do? What is it that brings you back to young adult and middle grade, or is there some genre you're still anticipating doing for adults?
The book I'm writing right now, not the funeral home book, the other one that my agent would kill me if I told you about, that might land in an adult space. I'm not positive. It's a war book, so the characters are young, but the timeline is long. So I wonder. I'm not quite sure. It's at a certain point. Sometimes it's audience. Sometimes you write. You're like, this is middle grade. It has a middle grade voice. It has all the middle grade tropes. I want it to go to young readers. And sometimes it's like, this is a story, and some marketer should decide what shelf it goes on. So to a certain extent, it's not up to me. But I am drawn continuously to young adult and middle grade books, both as a reader and as a writer. I think there is something in the best of them that's really okay. You know how they say teenagers are dramatic? I have one now. She's 14. You know how they say that teenagers are like super dramatic? And they mean it as an insult, like, tone it down, kids, right? It's prom. It's not life and death. But what we forget, I think, as adults is it felt like life and death. This drama is not a false drama, right? It genuinely feels to young people like weddings and funerals every day. They were living this incredibly intense life that doesn't have like a layer of, mortgage and dullness and responsibility on top of it, and how you just kind of learn to smooth yourself out to get along in the world. My 14-year-old is right a lot. There's no one quite as right as a 14-year-old girl who's right. So yeah, there's something appealing about writing that. And what I do is write in genre so that you can make it match the level of intensity. Because like prom is not life and death. But what is Cinderella except a story about prom that's life and death?
That's true.
Right? So genre is a way of fairy tales, fantasy, science fiction, even something like a murder mystery or an animal adventure. These vocabularies that we develop for young people are a way of taking a very ordinary story and just bumping it up to match that level of experience. Just, like, what is Buffy? It's like, my high school is built over the mouth of hell, right? My high school was built over the mouth of hell. Her high school is literally over the mouth of hell. Mine just must have been. It would have explained so many things, right? What is feeling like you don't belong and no one understands you? That's a changeling experience, right? It's, I turn out to be secretly the fairy king, and that's why none of this made sense. I am fundamentally special and different from everyone else, and here's my Hogwarts letter. These are not false feelings. These are real feelings, and feelings that we just kind of learn to ignore as grown-ups, because, it would be a pretty miserable, unlivable world if everyone at the DMV was waiting for their Hogwarts letter. But,
I'd be more excited about going there if I thought there was
absolutely.
a possibility I'd get one.
You kind of go along to get along, but kids don't. And so it's fun to write for them. It's really fun to write for them. They're so much more willing to tell a great story and to just match a level of drama and intensity. They're really interesting critical readers. Like, if you try to slip something past them, they're going to call BS so fast. And they will tell you about it if you go to school visits. They will actually tell you to your face. Like, grown-ups don't generally do that except on the internet. Face-to-face, they rarely. So, They're a fun
This
audience.
1-star review on Amazon where the author will never see it.
I had to put Goodreads into my porn filter so that my website wouldn't go there. It's not a happy place for authors. Everyone can have any opinion they want about their books. I just don't need to know. That's fine. No, I love writing for young people. I really do. I like young people. I like teenagers. I think teenagers are great. And I say this actually living with one all the time. I think teenagers are fabulous. They're so interesting. I can't wait for them to take over the world. They're going to do such a better job than my generation did running the planet into the ground. I think they got something going on. And I would write for them any day. It's an honor.
I really love it when I meet young people who are outraged and in a way that adults aren't. And it's like, no, it's not that adults are right and you're wrong. It's just we've all made compromises on how we have to go along to get along, and you're not there yet. You are having the correct response.
Absolutely.
Please continue raging.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And then final question, we'll call it a day because you've been extremely generous with your time, and I really enjoyed talking with you, and I want to end this while we're still having fun.
Okay.
So my last question for you is if there was one thing you could go back and tell yourself when you were starting writing that would have made your journey to this point easier, or a couple of things, what advice would you give a younger version of yourself that authors listening could apply to their own careers?
Well, I wish I could tell little bitty Erin that books are things that humans make, not actually created by unicorns. If I had realized that a little bit earlier, I might have gotten a few years in on the books. But then I might not have had the fun with physics. It's hard to rewrite time. But what I really wish I'd known as a young writer is there's a wonderful Ira Glass quote that you might know because it's out there a lot. It says basically you get into this game because you have taste. You recognize what magic looks like when you see it on the page. And, that's what's driving you forward. It's the quest for that magic. That you have to have that. If you don't have that, you really can't get very far. But when you put your first stuff on the page, it's not going to have that spark, and you're going to feel like a talentless hack. When you put your first stuff down as a beginner, it'll twinkle here and there, and that's great, but it's not going to live up to your expectations. And that's more an indication of your taste and your ability to perceive magic than it is of your talent. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you haven't quite learned to do it yet. And the other thing to know is when you're seeing it on someone's page and it's a published book, that's like draft 8. And it's been through the hands of probably 2 or 3 rounds of really smart readers and editors and proofreaders and copy editors. And a lot of people have made that book look as beautiful as it does. And the fact that your first draft doesn't is really not a condemnation. So I wish I had more fully understood that. And I hope that young people who are just starting out will give themselves a little time to play and just enjoy the twinkly parts. I know they want it to blaze. We all want it to be brilliant all the time. And it never is, and it's kind of disappointing. And I wish that young writers understood that everybody is kind of going, well, that bit is good, but the rest of it, maybe I should just, put it in a drawer and stop. Everybody wanders and everybody struggles. And if you keep going, you might not get where you wanted to end up, but you probably will end up somewhere interesting. So I wish I had known that earlier, and I hope some young writer out there can know it now.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Erin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Where can esteemed audience find you online, get signed up to follow you, and all that good stuff?
I have a website at erinbow.com, so ERINBOW. Easy name, traded it in for an easy one. And then I'm all over social media as Erin Bow Books.
So they can follow you on the Twitter, the Instagram, the Facebook, all that stuff?
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr.
Got it all. There you go.
Mhm.
And as always, esteemed audience, find me at middlegradeninja.com. You know who I am. Download the free books I told you about earlier, Banneker Bones, The Giant Robot Beings, The Book of David. Have a great time. Come back next Saturday. We'll be chatting with, I don't know, check the website. Somebody amazing. It'll be an incredible episode. Erin, I always ask our guests to sign us off with the totally justifies the name of the show because it's such a ninja-like sign-off phrase. That sign-off phrase is hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hiya and what have you.